What if the greatest danger inside the Achaemenid Empire was not an invading army, but a single man who dared to betray his king? Imagine standing in the vast shadow of an empire that stretched from the Indus Valley to the edges of Greece, where kings claimed to rule by divine mandate and where loyalty was not just a virtue, but a sacred duty. Now imagine the moment a traitor was caught, exposed before the royal court, knowing that Persian justice was not designed merely to punish, but to make an example that would echo through generations. Would you endure the weight of such a world where betrayal was treated as an offense against both the throne and the gods, and where the consequences were crafted to break not only the body, but the memory of the offender? The Achaemenid Persians were master architects of empire, but they were also architects of fear. Their methods for dealing with traitors were whispered across provinces as cautionary tales, stories of punishment so brutal that even seasoned officials hesitated to speak of them aloud. To understand the depth of these acts, you must picture the royal court not as a place of elegance and gold, but as a stage where political loyalty was tested with cold precision. Behind the polished floors and incense-filled halls, there existed chambers where the empire confronted betrayal in ways that fused ritual, symbolism, and raw cruelty. These were practices hidden beneath layers of official chronicles, erased or softened by later historians, yet preserved in shadows, fragments, and the uneasy memories of those who witnessed them. And here lies the unsettling truth. The Persians viewed treachery as a corruption capable of weakening the entire imperial structure. To them, a traitor was not simply a criminal, he was a threat to cosmic order, a disruptor of the harmony between king, people, and the divine. This belief unleashed punishments designed to reflect the gravity of that violation. Some were carried out publicly as warnings carved into the minds of thousands. Others happened in silence, deep within fortified palaces where the fate of the condemned was known only to a select few. You will soon see how these two worlds intertwined and how the empire crafted some of the most feared retributions of the ancient world. Before we move deeper into these hidden practices, tell me something. Have you ever imagined how fragile power truly is when one betrayal can shake an entire empire? If this question resonates with you, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or feelings about the weight of loyalty in a world built on fear and authority. And if this content is opening your eyes to a darker side of ancient history, remember to like the video and check whether you are subscribed to the channel. What you will discover next may surprise you, and the path ahead grows even more intense as we uncover how the Persians transformed treachery into a spectacle of power, leaving echoes that still disturb historians today. The vast machinery of the Achaemenid Empire did not function on military strength alone. Its true stability rested on an intricate system of loyalty, surveillance, and political expectation that extended from the highest nobles to the most distant provincial administrators. To understand why the Persians treated betrayal as the ultimate crime, you must picture an empire stretched across cultures, languages, and rival traditions, all unified under the authority of a single ruler believed to be chosen by the divine. In such a world, treason was not simply a legal violation, it was a crack in the foundation holding millions of people together. A single traitor could inspire rebellion in border regions, sabotage critical supply routes, or undermine the authority of the king in front of powerful subject nations watching for any sign of weakness. For the Persians, loyalty created order, but betrayal threatened chaos. A man accused of treason was seen not just as disloyal, but as someone willing to jeopardize the delicate balance that allowed the empire to function. This is why the Persian court developed procedures that were as methodical as they were terrifying. Officials documented even the smallest signs of disobedience. Spies and informants embedded in the administrative system reported directly to the king. And when suspicion surfaced, the machinery of investigation moved swiftly, treating the accused as a potential destabilizing force long before any formal judgment was announced. The empire could survive an external invasion, but it could not allow internal fracture to spread unchecked. This severity was also deeply tied to ideology. The Persians believed their king ruled with divine approval, and so to betray him was to betray the cosmic order that separated civilization from disorder. Even minor acts of disloyalty could be interpreted as a threat to the sacred bond between ruler and realm. That belief transformed every official, soldier, or courtier into a potential guardian of imperial stability. The system demanded vigilance. Those closest to power lived under constant pressure to prove their devotion, while those accused of wavering faced a process that left almost no room for redemption once suspicion had taken hold. As this structure grew more complex, the consequences of treachery became increasingly ceremonial. Punishment was not merely intended to remove a dangerous individual. It served to reinforce the message that the empire tolerated no weakness, no hesitation, no divided loyalty. The machinery that sustained the empire also sustained fear, and every level of authority understood that a single betrayal could ripple outward, shaping decisions made far beyond the palace walls. In the coming moments, you will see how this ideological framework sculpted the brutal rituals used to expose, mark, and ultimately crush those judged unworthy of the trust placed upon them, drawing the empire ever deeper into shadows where loyalty and terror became indistinguishable. The moment a man was suspected of betraying the Achaemenid Empire, his fate entered a silent but meticulously structured ritual that blended administrative scrutiny with symbolic humiliation. The Persians did not rush toward punishment. Instead, they relied on a layered investigative process designed to expose disloyalty step by step, stripping away any defense the accused might attempt to offer. Within the empire's rigid hierarchy, even the slightest sign of wavering allegiance triggered inquiries carried out by officials who understood that their own reputations depended on precision. Each testimony, each intercepted message, each observed inconsistency became a thread in a growing tapestry of guilt. Inside the courts of power, the ritual began not with violence, but with isolation. The accused was often removed from his position without explanation, placed under watch by men loyal to the king, and denied communication with allies who might intervene. This isolation served as both psychological pressure and strategic containment. The Persians believed that the act of betrayal left spiritual stains, and so the accused was treated as someone whose very presence could disrupt the moral order. During this phase, administrators compiled reports, cross-examined witnesses, and scrutinized the accused's past decisions, searching for patterns that might reveal hidden motives. In a vast empire stitched together by fragile alliances, even a minor deviation from expected behavior could be interpreted as evidence of treachery. Once suspicions solidified, the process moved into a more symbolic stage. The Persians believed that guilt should not merely be proven, it should be exposed. Some records describe formal presentations before local or regional authorities, where accusations were read aloud, forcing the accused to confront his diminishing standing. This public marking was essential. It signaled to the community that the accused had crossed a boundary, separating loyal subjects from moral corruption. The ritualized language used during these declarations reinforced the cosmic narrative that betrayal disturbed the very harmony of the realm, a belief woven deeply into Persian ideology. From there, the ritual transformed into something darker. The accused would be confronted with objects or symbols intended to represent the weight of his violation. In some cases, written documents of his supposed offences were placed before him. In others, items linked to the court or the king served as reminders of the authority he had challenged. These gestures were not casual. They were crafted to break the mind before any physical punishment was considered. The accused was expected to confront the enormity of what he had done, surrounded by officials who interpreted silence, hesitation, or defiance as further confirmation of guilt. As the ritual progressed, the accused became a living example of what happened when loyalty fractured. His voice grew smaller, his presence diminished, and the empire prepared to unveil the next stage of this carefully orchestrated descent. Because in the Persian worldview, once a traitor was exposed, the path ahead no longer belonged to negotiation or mercy. It belonged to the darker forces that shaped imperial justice, forces that soon shifted from ritual to raw brutality, revealing the terrifying power the empire wielded against those it deemed unworthy of trust. The transition from ritual exposure to physical torment marked the moment when Persian justice abandoned restraint and embraced spectacle. Under the rule of Darius I, punishments inflicted on confirmed traitors grew increasingly theatrical, designed not only to destroy the condemned, but to shape the fears of everyone who witnessed the event. To understand the scale of these punishments, you must imagine a gathering of soldiers, officials, and common citizens summoned to observe an act that blended legal authority with raw intimidation. The empire believed that the body of a traitor could become a warning tower, a message carved into flesh rather than stone, meant to endure longer in memory than any proclamation. In these public spaces, the traitor was brought forth with calculated ceremony. Guards loyal to the crown surrounded him, not merely to prevent escape, but to reinforce the idea that he had been cut off from all protection. Before the punishment began, accusations were recited once more, spoken with deliberate clarity, so that no ambiguity remained in the minds of those watching. The Persians understood the psychological effect of repetition. Each restatement of guilt transformed the condemned man from a political figure into a symbol of disorder, and when his guilt became a shared certainty among the crowd, the real display began. Among the documented punishments used during this era, some were crafted to destroy the body slowly, ensuring that the agony of the condemned unfolded over hours or even days. Restraints forced the body into positions that amplified suffering. Implements heated by fire were pressed against exposed skin as a reminder of the cosmic flames believed to judge moral corruption. The traitor's cries echoed across the assembly, not to provoke pity, but to deepen the memory of what betrayal cost. These sounds were part of the spectacle, as integral to the punishment as the physical wounds. The Persians believed that terror engraved through sound and sight lingered longer in public consciousness than any decree issued by the throne. But the cruelty did not end with the individual. His family, his allies, and sometimes entire households watched in silence, forced to confront the fragility of their positions within the imperial hierarchy. Officials stationed at the edges of the crowd observed reactions carefully. Averted eyes, whispered conversations, or signs of sympathy could raise suspicion, possibly triggering new investigations. The spectacle was therefore not only a punishment, but a test. The empire used these events to gauge loyalty in real time, turning each public torment into a census of fear, measuring how deeply imperial authority penetrated the hearts of its subjects. When the punishment finally reached its peak, the condemned man no longer resembled a political figure. He had been remade into a message, a living boundary marker separating loyalty from treachery. His suffering communicated what words alone could not. For the Persians, the body of a traitor became a kind of text, written in wounds, interpreted by every witness according to the empire's moral grammar. And as the crowd dispersed, Returning to their cities and villages, they carried with them the unspoken understanding that the empire's justice was not distant or theoretical. It was immediate, visceral, and capable of descending upon anyone whose allegiance wavered. If this moment stirs something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. What does it reveal about how power sustains itself through fear, and how far an empire will go to protect its foundation of loyalty? Your reflection helps expand this exploration into the darker corners of ancient justice. Beyond the violent public spectacles that etched fear into the minds of common citizens, the Persians reserved an entirely different category of punishment for traitors whose crimes touched the inner circles of power. These were not the torments meant for crowds in open squares. They unfolded behind stone walls, deep within controlled spaces where only select officials and royal attendants were permitted to witness the empire's most secretive form of retribution. Under the authority of rulers such as Xerxes I, the Persian court understood that certain betrayals were too delicate, too politically charged, or too humiliating to expose publicly. Instead, these traitors were consumed by methods engineered for silence, leaving behind no stories except the ones whispered through later generations. The first stage of these hidden punishments resembled erasure more than execution. The traitor's name would be removed from administrative records, wiped from the clay tablets that logged appointments, titles, and duties. To the empire, this was not merely an administrative adjustment, it was a symbolic annihilation. A man whose name disappeared from the archives ceased to exist in the official memory of the realm. His lineage, accomplishments, and service dissolved in the same darkness that awaited his body. This erasure extended to his family as well, who often lost privileges, lands, or political standing as a warning that disloyalty poisoned an entire household. Not only the individual accused. Once stripped of identity, the condemned entered a realm where punishment was both intimate and controlled. Guards escorted him into chambers designed to prevent sound from escaping, spaces built not for spectacle but for containment. Here, he encountered methods crafted with precision, prolonged deprivation, forced immobility, or exposure to psychological manipulation that gradually broke down whatever resolve remained. These techniques aimed to dismantle the traitor internally, leaving him deeply aware that he had been cut off, not only from society, but from the world itself. Silence became a weapon, amplifying the weight of his isolation. Unlike public tortures, these private punishments were rarely documented. The Persians believed that certain acts of disloyalty threatened the structural integrity of the state so profoundly that their resolutions needed to vanish into secrecy. Execution through starvation, suffocation, or deliberate neglect occurred in ways that ensured the body could be disposed of without drawing attention. In some accounts, the remains were buried anonymously, preventing the family from holding any form of ritual mourning. To an ancient Persian, being denied proper burial rites was itself a form of spiritual condemnation, a final statement that the traitor's actions had severed all ties to the cosmic harmony upheld by the empire. The political logic behind these hidden punishments was simple but ruthless. A public execution risked exposing the extent of the traitor's influence or revealing political fractures within the court. Silence, on the other hand, maintained the illusion of unity. The empire allowed rumors to circulate just enough to reinforce fear, but never enough to reveal the full truth. The disappearance of a traitor became a shadow on the palace walls, a reminder that the empire's reach extended into places no one could see. Through this calculated obscurity, the Persians maintained control not only over bodies and names, but over the very narrative of power, ensuring that the threat of betrayal remained something whispered, never openly discussed, leaving an atmosphere heavy with uncertainty as new dangers prepared to surface. Religion and divine authority were central pillars of the Achaemenid Empire, and they became powerful tools in the enforcement of brutal punishments. The Persians did not separate their political systems from their religious beliefs. Instead, they intertwined them, framing justice as both earthly and cosmic. A traitor was not merely an offender against the king, but a disruptor of the order that the gods had sanctioned. Violating loyalty was portrayed as challenging divine will itself, a notion that gave extraordinary weight to punishments and justified severity that might otherwise seem excessive or cruel to outsiders. In this environment, fear was amplified because every act of disobedience carried consequences that extended beyond the material realm. High-ranking officials and priests were often involved in the ritualization of punishment. They interpreted the signs of guilt and performed ceremonies that transformed judgment into sacred ritual. For example, an accused traitor might be paraded before altars or temples, their offenses read aloud with references to the gods' authority, suggesting that their very disloyalty threatened both heaven and earth. The psychological impact was profound. Observers understood that betrayal was not a private matter, but a moral rupture that angered divine powers. This integration of religious legitimacy into punishment amplified the spectacle and ensured that fear penetrated all levels of society, from nobility to common citizens. The Persians also used sacred symbolism to structure the steps of punishment. Certain rituals incorporated elements of purification, confession, or symbolic mortification, each intended to convey the gravity of the offense in ways that were both visible and unforgettable. In some cases, the accused was forced to participate in acts that symbolically reenacted their betrayal, demonstrating their guilt to the court and to the gods. These ceremonies were designed to leave no doubt that divine and royal authority were inseparable, and that defiance was a crime against the entire moral fabric of the empire. Witnesses were reminded that loyalty was not optional, it was a cosmic requirement. At the same time, religious justification allowed the rulers to maintain public order while enacting punishments that might otherwise have been morally questionable. By presenting the eradication of traitors as a sacred duty, the king framed extreme cruelty as both righteous and necessary. This approach reinforced hierarchy, ensuring that even those closest to power understood that disloyalty would provoke divine as well as royal wrath. Reports and inscriptions preserved in palaces, though sanitized over time, hint at the meticulous care taken to emphasize that the punishment was part of a larger moral and cosmological order. The fusion of religion and brutality also served a strategic purpose. It extended the empire's reach beyond surveillance or armies. Fear became spiritual as well as physical. A person witnessing the punishment of a traitor could not dismiss it as merely political retribution. They were witnessing the consequences of disrupting the divine order. That dual pressure, temporal and eternal, ensured that the empire maintained obedience not just through force but through internalized dread. And as we move deeper into the accounts of specific punishments that shocked even the royal court, you will see how this combination of theology and terror created consequences so severe that the nobility themselves shivered at the mention of betrayal, fully aware that no one, however high-ranking, could escape the empire's judgment. Even within the gilded halls of the royal court, betrayal was a concept that terrified the nobility as much as it endangered the accused. The Achaemenid Empire was meticulous in ensuring that no act of disloyalty went unnoticed, and some punishments were so shocking that even seasoned officials and princes found themselves unsettled. In rare instances, reports describe nobles who fainted at the sight of a fellow courtier being subjected to punishments designed to illustrate the empire's absolute authority. The message was clear: no one, regardless of rank or favor, was immune. Loyalty was absolute, and the consequences of transgression were engineered to resonate across every level of the hierarchy. These extreme measures often included methods that went beyond mere physical torment, combining public humiliation, ritualized degradation, and the systematic stripping of dignity. A traitor could be bound in intricate restraints that exposed them before a select audience of advisors, priests, and royal witnesses. Every action, every movement was designed to reinforce their vulnerability and illustrate the empire's power. In some accounts, nobles who had mismanaged provinces or failed to enforce imperial decrees were forced to endure symbolic rituals where the weight of their failure was made tangible, often through physical burdens or ceremonial gestures that made their guilt visually apparent to everyone present. One particularly chilling practice involved forcing the traitor to witness the consequences of their actions on others, including subordinates, family members, or loyal citizens whose lives had been affected. By transforming punishment into a theater of fear, the empire ensured that obedience was maintained not just through personal survival, but through the recognition that betrayal could endanger countless lives. Even the most confident courtiers internalized this lesson, understanding that their own power and influence could vanish in an instant if they failed to adhere to the rigid standards of loyalty. In this way, the empire weaponized guilt, grief, and terror simultaneously, producing an atmosphere where compliance was inseparable from fear. Historians studying the surviving records from palaces, inscriptions, and correspondence note that some of these acts were executed with precision so methodical it seemed almost clinical. The Persians developed a subtle hierarchy of punishments, scaling severity according to the perceived threat and the status of the accused. What shocked even the royal court was not merely the cruelty itself, but the intellectual rigor applied to the process. The way every detail was calculated to maximize psychological impact. The nobility understood that observing such punishments was a lesson in both morality and power, a demonstration of what could happen if anyone dared to challenge the empire's order. As these stories emerged through accounts and oral histories, the fear they inspired extended beyond the palace walls. The empire's elite began to comment privately, in whispers, about the punishments that seemed almost too extreme even for Persia's standards. These discussions, carried through corridors and private chambers, reinforced the invisible reach of the king's authority, reminding everyone that betrayal, once detected, would be addressed with measures that left no room for escape. If this revelation strikes you, leave a comment below. What do you think it would take to survive in a court where the nobility themselves trembled at the thought of a single misstep? Share your thoughts, because understanding the psychology of fear in such an empire helps illuminate just how the Achaemenids maintained control over one of the largest empires in human history. The most effective weapon in the Achaemenid arsenal was not the bow, the chariot, or the palace guard. It was fear itself, wielded with precision to sustain the empire's vast network of control. Governors, military commanders, and provincial administrators learned quickly that the Persians did not rely solely on written decrees or formal laws to ensure obedience. They relied on the constant awareness that betrayal carried consequences far beyond personal punishment. In territories thousands of miles from the royal court, rumors of the punishments endured by traitors circulated, shaping behavior and discouraging dissent even before any investigation began. Fear became both preventative and operational, a silent enforcer that required no physical presence, yet dictated conduct as effectively as any army. Psychological strategy was deeply embedded in the daily operations of the empire. Officials were trained to observe subtle signs of disloyalty, noting inconsistencies in speech, hesitation in execution of orders, or Unusual interactions with peers. A single misstep could trigger suspicion, initiating a cascade of investigations that often escalated into punishment. In this environment, the awareness of surveillance altered behavior permanently. Subjects internalized the empire's expectations, anticipating consequences even when none were immediately visible. Loyalty, in effect, was enforced not just by consequence, but by anticipation of consequence, creating a self-sustaining system of control that extended the empire's influence without the need for constant direct oversight. The integration of communication networks amplified the reach of fear. Couriers, messengers, and provincial inspectors acted as the empire's eyes and ears, transmitting reports of behavior back to the central authority. A governor's indecision, a commander's hesitancy, or even a minor dispute over resources could be interpreted as potential treachery, and these assessments were relayed swiftly, often triggering remote interventions. The perception that the king was always watching, that no act of betrayal could remain hidden, became a psychological mechanism that ensured compliance across vast distances. Every village, every garrison, and every administrative office operated under the invisible weight of imperial scrutiny. This use of fear extended into the very culture of the empire. Stories of punishment, whether exaggerated or accurate, were retold as cautionary tales, often accompanied by symbolic representations in art, inscriptions, or ceremonial displays. The Achaemenids understood that memory and narrative could serve as instruments of authority. A governor who witnessed the fate of a traitor firsthand would carry that lesson into every decision thereafter, reinforcing the empire's power through repeated, observed consequences. The effectiveness of this strategy lay in its universality. Fear transcended social rank, geography, and personal loyalty, binding diverse populations to the same code of obedience. By embedding terror into daily governance, the Persians ensured that loyalty became habitual, almost instinctive. Subjects and officials alike operated under a constant psychological pressure that normalized compliance while amplifying the consequences of defiance. Even those far removed from the royal court came to understand that the empire's reach extended beyond armies, beyond walls, and beyond law itself. The Achaemenid method of control transformed fear into a tangible force, one that shaped behavior, reinforced hierarchy, and preserved the cohesion of an empire that might otherwise have fractured under its own size. And as we continue to explore how these strategies manifested in interactions with foreign powers, it becomes clear that terror was not a side effect of Persian rule. It was a deliberate instrument of diplomacy, wielded with the same skill and precision as any envoy or general. The Persian approach to terror extended far beyond the borders of the empire, transforming punishment into a form of communication with foreign powers and rival states. Envoys arriving at the court of Achaemenid Empire quickly learned that the fate of traitors was a message in itself, signaling the consequences of defiance or betrayal. Diplomacy was inseparable from demonstration, and even a seemingly routine audience with the king could serve as a subtle reminder of the empire's capacity for extreme enforcement. Reports of punishments traveled swiftly, carried by returning envoys and traders, reaching the ears of allied rulers and potential adversaries alike, ensuring that the empire's influence extended well beyond the reach of its armies. This diplomatic dimension of cruelty was carefully calibrated. Persian rulers understood that fear could be more persuasive than negotiation, more effective than treaties. By allowing accounts of brutal punishments to circulate, the empire sent a clear signal. Loyalty was expected not only from those within the court or military, but from every state and province that interacted with Persia. Envoys and foreign dignitaries could observe that obedience was not a matter of preference, but a prerequisite for survival. This strategic use of terror as a tool of foreign policy ensured that even distant kingdoms understood the consequences of challenging imperial authority, turning the empire's reputation for brutality into an extension of its political power. The psychological impact of this approach was amplified by spectacle and secrecy. Envoys might be shown the aftermath of punishment, including the public humiliation of minor officials or the ceremonial execution of courtiers, without revealing the full scope of methods used against more serious offenders. The ambiguity was deliberate, leaving observers uncertain of what they had witnessed and increasing their anxiety about crossing the empire in the future. This uncertainty became a powerful instrument of influence, shaping decision-making and reinforcing compliance without the need for ongoing military intervention. The empire's ability to manipulate perception was as critical as its ability to enforce action, ensuring that fear permeated every layer of diplomacy. Furthermore, this strategy created a feedback loop that reinforced internal stability. The nobility, military leaders, and provincial administrators recognized that foreign observers were watching, and that any hint of weakness or disloyalty would be reported. This external scrutiny intensified internal pressures, compelling officials to maintain strict adherence to the king's expectations. Betrayal, therefore, became doubly dangerous. It threatened immediate punishment and exposed the empire's vulnerabilities to foreign powers. In this environment, the perception of omnipresent oversight, both domestic and international, ensured that obedience was habitual, ingrained, and self-reinforcing. By transforming punishment into a tool of international influence, the Achaemenids integrated fear into every facet of governance and diplomacy. The empire did not merely respond to threats, it anticipated them, projecting its authority through acts of terror that reached both the inner court and the courts of distant kings. This strategic deployment of cruelty blurred the line between domestic control and foreign policy, demonstrating that power in the ancient world was maintained not only through armies and wealth, but through the carefully cultivated perception that betrayal, in any form, carried consequences that no one could evade. The legacy of Achaemenid punishment stretched far beyond the walls of palaces, the reaches of provincial governors, and the distant courts of foreign kings. By the time a traitor was brought to judgment, every act, every ceremony, every public and private display of consequence had been orchestrated to reinforce the perception that the empire's authority was absolute. Achaemenid Empire understood that the memory of terror was more enduring than the memory of mercy. The body of a traitor could be destroyed, their family shamed, and their records erased, but the impression left on observers, on citizens, officials, and foreign envoys was permanent. It served as a reminder that loyalty was demanded, and that disloyalty would be met with calculated severity, meticulously engineered to protect the cohesion of an empire spanning continents and cultures. Yet, what endures is not merely fear or the record of cruelty. The meticulous strategy behind these punishments reveals an understanding of human psychology that was as sophisticated as any military campaign. The empire leveraged anticipation, observation, and spectacle to ensure compliance without constant physical enforcement. By transforming punishment into both ritual and communication, the Persians created a system in which obedience became habitual and betrayal almost unthinkable. Even centuries later, historians marvel at the precision with which these acts were executed, the balance between public example and private erasure, and the way terror was used not only to enforce laws, but to shape behavior across a sprawling, diverse population. This approach had profound implications for both the empire and history. Those who witnessed the punishment of traitors, whether within the court or in distant provinces, carried the memory of these events forward, shaping behavior and influencing political dynamics. Long after the immediate moment had passed, Foreign powers understood that the Achaemenid Empire could project authority not just through military might, but through calculated psychological impact, turning stories of betrayal and punishment into instruments of control that reached far beyond Persian borders. Fear became a universal language, and the empire spoke it fluently. Now, having explored the extreme measures, the ritualized cruelty, and the strategic use of terror, it is time to reflect on what this teaches us about power and authority. If you have followed this journey through the shadows of one of history's greatest empires, consider leaving a comment to share your thoughts. Did the calculated severity of the Achaemenid punishments surprise you? Do you see parallels in how fear is used to govern even today? While you write, remember to like the video if it has opened your eyes to the darker mechanisms of ancient governance. And if you want to continue exploring these hidden truths of history, make sure you are subscribed, because there is much more to uncover about how empires shaped the human experience through fear, loyalty, and control. There is another story waiting, one that will take you even deeper into the ways power and terror intertwined to leave marks that centuries cannot erase.